people of Earth, hello the internet, hello devices used to access the internet, and hello to Jason Isaac. I hope you're all well. Today we're going to talk about the executive. Now this is going to be a fairly dry and lengthy presentation, so I'm not going to hang around. We're going to talk in a little bit more detail later about how the different models within the executive work, different prime ministers, relationships within the prime ministers. This is really just going to be a really dull, dry run through this, and hopefully we're going to get onto that. But this is where you need to know. These are the things you need to know when we're talking about the executive. And we're going to start right at the very start with what is executive about the executive? Well, the executive is there to make decisions. Okay, that is the first thing that it does. It makes policy decisions. What are we going to do? And then having made those policy decisions, they will be put into Parliament, usually in the form of bills, sometimes just in the form of decisions. And Parliament will have to take those proposals, decide what they're going to do with them, and then if they turn them into bills, then those bills get passed back to the government to be put into effect. So policy goes in one direction, laws go in the other, and that is the government's job on a day-to-day basis. And this is what government looks like. These are all the different offices of government. This was back in Cameron's administration when we didn't really have anything to worry about and they could go out and do these huge projects in the newspapers because we weren't reporting about Brexit. So we've got health, we've got Home Office, we've got education, we've got defence, we've got all the big offices of state here that you probably know all about from your various investigations of politics. And how much does it cost to keep that on the go? Well, these are the figures again from back in the dim and distant days of 2011, 2012, when nobody had anything else to do. And instead they could calculate these lovely wall charts and you'd come up with a number there of 700 billion. Now, that has increased. And you can see here the figures from 2016 to 2017. We're up there to a very, very healthy 772 billion because our population keeps growing and because we now have to deal with things like Brexit, which is costing us an arm and a leg. And that's before we start tarmacking all of Kent to turn it into a lorry park. We can see here how how spending has increased generally. The welfare state, perhaps, social security, social protection there being a massive feature as people live longer and and the population grows. There we go. If you're really interested in this, this website is quite good fun, and you can see here that the number is now, for 2019, we're up to 818 billion. That's how much it costs to keep Albion PLC on the road. But I don't really want to get dragged into that right now. What I want to talk about is government. We need to know that government exists because Parliament says it should. The rules of the parliamentary game, we know of the rules of parliamentary government, from, through, and to. Government is chosen from Parliament. It is accountable to Parliament and it should operate through Parliament because it has no intrinsic authority. All government authority and legitimacy comes from Parliament, and this is the game of parliamentary government, and those are the specific rules. So, what is government? And there are two parts to government. There are two parts to the executive. One is permanent and the other is political. The permanent is the civil service, and these, of course, are our career bureaucrats. They are permanent. They don't change with elections. They are neutral. They are politically unbiased, without partisan bias. And they're anonymous. You shouldn't be throwing your civil servants under the bus. The decisions that are made by politicians, and responsibility for those decisions resides with the political executive. The civil service is a fairly professional and competent entity. They will make their decisions. They will advise the president. They will advise, sorry, not the president, but the politicians. They will advise the ministers, and the ministers will make a decision off the back of that. If the decision turns out to be a bad one, then the minister should take responsibility for that. You should not go around throwing your civil servants under the bus. You may remember the tragic story of David Kelly a while ago. He was exposed as having given a specific set of advice to the government. The government wasn't very happy about it, and it really ended very, very badly for everybody concerned. The role of the civil servant is to advise the political executive on policy making and the implementation of whatever that policy is. So a twofold role there, advising with the decision and implementing the decision, or dealing with the outcome of that decision. On the other hand, we have the political executive. These are our government ministers, career politicians, political appointments. And so their ability to exercise their role effectively depends entirely on the advice that they are getting from their civil servants. And these people are not necessarily experts in their field. The Education Secretary doesn't necessarily know much about education, but he has lots of very, very adept advisors who should be telling him what to do. They give him the advice. He makes a policy decision off the back of that. So there you go. Their role is the making of decisions and the implementation, usually on the advice of the permanent executive. Let's see if we can explain that a little more clearly. Here, for the sake of argument, let's pretend that this is the civil service. And in 2008, some idea of how long these notes have been going on, the government looked a bit like that. And then in 2010, we got rid of that lot and we got in a new lot, and they look like that. And then in 2015, we got rid of them and we got in this lot. And of course, they lasted up to about 2017 when we got a whole new lot in again. All the time that was happening, these guys did not change. The civil service has remained the same throughout. Now, obviously, there's been some transition, some change in the workforce, but the general thrust of this is that the civil service remains constant while the political masters change according to the electoral schedule. So how does this actually work in real life? Well, in real life, what happens is the minister will rely upon the civil service for advice in a range of policy areas. Their job, of course, as I said earlier, is to come up with policy, and that policy then gets fed back to the civil service. The civil service will take that policy and come up with a bill. So here we have a bill. That bill is then presented back to government. Government takes the bill, says thank you very much. They can't do anything with it. They need somebody to turn that into law. And so that law goes off to Parliament. That bill, sorry, goes off to Parliament. And then a little while later, Parliament presents government with its bill, with the law. Then that law is passed back to the civil service, and the civil service put that into effect in the real world. So that's really the relationship between the political and the permanent executive, and that's probably about as much as you need to know. Now, how is the executive organized? Well, these figures are a little bit out of date. There are not 24 ministerial departments. We've got another one because Brexit. So this is now a slightly out of date document. They haven't quite updated this very, very particular thing. You can see it all online. If you just go to gov.uk, you will get all of this information. So again, here we go. We're actually +1. So we're looking at 22 there. And yeah, so this is what government looks like. And more specifically, this is what government looks like. So here we have our PM, she's out there, and then we have another 22 ministers, including the extra one, which is the MP for Brexit. In addition to that, we have these individuals who are also allowed to attend cabinet. And yeah, those are your government ministers in a nutshell. Now, each of these ministers supports underneath them a huge office. So you've got your big offices of state here. The minister sits at the top of the pyramid. Underneath him, there is 2 or 3 secretaries of state. Then there'll be a few more parliamentary undersecretaries of state. And then there'll be even more parliamentary secretaries, still more. And the key thing here is that all of these guys here, and this is our minister, there are ministers here. So this is education, so a secretary of state there. And then we've got a few ministers of state, and then an undersecretary, 2 undersecretaries of state. The key thing really here is that all of these ministers, everybody who features in this ministerial pyramid, is bound by collective responsibility. Now, that is very, very important because this goes to fund, or goes to create, what we know as the payroll vote. These guys have to support government policy in Parliament. They have no choice but to support government policy or resign. We'll come to that, I suppose, in a bit later, because let's first talk about individual responsibility. This is the idea that each minister is responsible for their own behaviour and for the performance of their department. You may remember recently that Amber Rudd resigned because of mistakes made in the Home Office, not as it was under her watch, but under the watch of her predecessor, somebody called Theresa May. Whatever did happen to her. Anyway, Amber Rudd was thrown under the bus for that, or she took the can for that. She resigned, even though it wasn't necessarily her mistake. It was the mistake of the department, and so she carried the can for that. Collective responsibility. This is the idea that all members of government are responsible for the decisions of government. This is why we've seen a slew of Brexit resignations, including, of course, 3 recent Brexit secretaries, which is quite spectacular when you think about it. So We have ministers being bound by individual responsibility. Have they done their job properly? And collective responsibility. Can they bring themselves to agree with all of the policy decisions of government? And if the answer to either of those is no, then they have to leave. They cannot remain in post. So, Cabinet, here we go. The thing about Cabinet is that it has two particular roles. The most important one is this one, making decisions. That is to say that it has executive authority. The other aspect that it has is the implementation of that decision making, and that is administrative. Now, in terms of administration, this is the boring things. This is when you get your law back from Parliament and now suddenly you have to provide for it. That is administering the law that is made by Parliament or whatever other policy it is that comes out of government. The reason why this is important is because in America, in the United States, the Cabinet does not have an executive function. In the United States, Cabinet is entirely administrative. It has no formal constitutional executive authority. All of that authority resides in the White House. But we can worry about that later. But just park that one for a minute because it's a relevant point of comparison that you may find useful in the future. In terms of the Prime Minister, those are the PM's formal titles. What does that mean? Not very much, to be brutally honest. The most important one is this, that amongst the peers, amongst everybody in Cabinet, the Prime Minister is said to be first among equals. What does that mean? Well, it's an oxymoron, you just can't make sense of it. We'll deal with this more when we get to it, but what it really says is that the Prime Minister's relationship with the Cabinet is entirely what the Prime Minister wants to have and what Cabinet is prepared to endure. But again, we'll look at that in more detail when we come to look at specific Prime Ministers later. The other thing we need to talk about really are these two entities. Cabinet Office, and you can look at it there. This is about actually making sure that Cabinet functions effectively. And then number 10 is about helping the Prime Minister. And what we see in the future is, what we will go on to see, is the way in which the number 10 office has expanded dramatically and to a certain extent started to contain or started to absorb some of the functions of the Cabinet Office. And a large part of this is down to special political advisors. These, again, we're going to look at in more detail on an individual basis, but the numbers have exploded dramatically recently. There's no SPADs there. Again, this is back in the dim and distant pre-Brexit days when we had time to pull up these sorts of power sheets. What I really wanted to show you was this, and again, this is going back a little bit to the Cameron administration, and you can see there just how many special advisors there are who are working for the PM. And if the PM has got that many special advisors working for them, then that means that the PM is making a lot of decisions. And if the PM is making a lot of decisions, then the question is, what actually is Cabinet for? If all of the decisions are being made in Cabinet, then if all the decisions, are being made by the Prime Minister, then what is the point of having Cabinet government? And this is what we're seeing here, the way in which the decision-making process becomes increasingly focused in the Prime Minister. Cabinet government, you're looking at collective decision-making. Prime Ministerial government, the idea that the Prime Minister leads from the front. Presidential government, the idea that the Prime Minister makes all of the decisions, and Cabinet is really just there to ratify those decisions and to see them implemented at a later date. Again, we're going to do a deep dive into all of this when we come to look at individual Prime Ministers and do some case studies on that. Other interesting political developments, core executive, this was very much the model we would associate with Blair and to a certain extent Cameron. And with our Quad government, this was an oddity that is more associated with coalition, largely because there were 4 people who were basically running the show. Again, we're going to look at all of these in much, much more detail when we come to those individual case studies. This is a fantastic resource. This is the LSE political blog. I will link off to it in the things that come afterwards, but it's a really, really good resource, and I urge you to look at it. And I think that is me just about out of time. I look forward to your questions and to your comments. Again, that's gone at a hell of a pace. Go back, pause, rewind, work out the questions, bring me your questions, and I look forward to answering them, many of which we will conclude when we do a deep dive into each of these individual Prime Ministers of the last 40-odd years. Oh, and we're done. See you soon. Hope that was fun. Bye now.